Hopefully he's there. Hi, Michael.
Hello.
How are you? I know you're a very busy man, so thank you for joining us. The GRC Lunch Club, your end, the GRC Supper Club, our side. So thank you very much. And for anyone that doesn't know Michael on the call, he's a recognised GRC pundit actually internationally, and he used to be at Forrester, I believe, was it 6 to 7 years as their lead researcher across GRC software and risk management. He's got 23 years plus experience in helping organizations around risk management and governance. And he's a renowned keynote speaker, author, and advisor. So please welcome to the stage, Michael Rasmussen, who I believe is going to really follow on and dovetail into Sandra's conversation about operational resilience and maybe the disconnect from the business continuity side and whether we need greater regulation, or we need to understand it more and push it out there through the business. So please, Michael, over to you.
It's a pleasure being here. I don't necessarily need to age myself more, but it's actually 27 years. So I think I need to update my LinkedIn profile because I think it's 4 years old.
So well, I was going to say you started in GRC when you were about six years old then, probably, I would say. But over to you. I will turn off my webcam so everyone can focus on you.
I've been saying for about 15 years that I don't understand the disconnect between business continuity and operational risk management. It just, has boggled me because there's so much synergy and things that they can leverage from each other that they should be integrated. But today's organization is what I call navigating chaos. In fact, I wrote a paper on this that was published in October in Enterprise Risk Magazine by the Institute of Risk Management over there in London. That today's organization is dynamic. It's changing minute by minute, second by second. Employees are changing, economics are changing, business processes are changing, technology is changing. We have things coming at us from every direction. And today's business is definitely chaos, and we have to be able to see the interrelationships of all these different types of risk. In fact, the physicist Fritjof Capra stated, the more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they're interconnected and interdependent. The physicist here is talking about biological ecosystems, but it applies so well to business and risk management today that our problems, our risks, are interconnected and interdependent. We need to be able to see all these different strands and threads of risk and how they relate to each other. Look at COVID-19, for example. The current pandemic, the core event is a health and safety risk. And so we have a global virus pandemic that started off in Asia, potentially from, a wet market with bats, but that little event has this cascading impact. It reminds me of chaos theory, with the theory of the flutter of a butterfly's wings in the Netherlands can influence the development path of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Right now we've got a worldwide crisis and everything being shut down. With something starting to finally come into recovery, all because of a wet market in China, potentially. And so it starts off with the health and safety risk, but then we have a significant economic risk from that, risk exposure. Well, we've got IT security risks because people are working from home in remote offices, and all of a sudden the blender in that remote office could be a doorway in and threat to that home office worker. I'm serious. My wife and I upgraded our blender at the Wisconsin State Fair in August. My blender is connected. I can program it with my iPhone. My TVs are connected. My wall outlets are connected. If there's some type of security vulnerability and exposure in my home office, it could expose my computer and the data connections and data I have with that computer. We have IT security risks. With the COVID-19, not only is it a health and safety risk, as I illustrated, it has an economic risks, and business has to have to adjust their objectives, has operational resiliency and supply chain and third-party risks, has IT security risks. As a result of the remote office environment, we're seeing increased harassment risks, where before people were in the corporate environment pretty much knew how to behave, even though some still did not, and we have the Me Too focus and everything else. But for general, most employees knew how to behave in the home office, in the corporate environment. Now they're working from home, and things are a little more lax at home, and they're a little more freer with their tongues, and things are being said in messaging and Zoom calls and things like that because people aren't in their same corporate office environment. So we have increased risk of harassment because of COVID-19. And we have increased risk of modern slavery because those factories over in remote parts of the world, they're being devastated by the virus as well, and employees are sick or dying. And as a result, some of these factories are staffing, child labor and forced labor, which increases our modern slavery risk. You have increased risk of fraud because organizations, the employees are concerned about providing for their family. And good employees that under normal good circumstances wouldn't do bad things, under extreme economic pressure to provide for their family and what their future might look like, they're more likely to commit fraud. We have increased risk of bribery and corruption because all of a sudden now, shipping and supply chains are being restricted, and it takes more time to get things through customs. And there's more risk that somebody in the business is going to pay that government official a bribe to expedite their goods through customs to get things through quicker, because we're all dealing with less staff, and it takes more time to get things moving around the world right now. And there's less planes flying. And so there's increased risk of bribery and corruption. And we can go on and on and on about all these interconnected risks. But what's the challenge in a lot of organizations is they manage all these risks in separate silos. And they even when we've had enterprise risk management programs, I have been blogging on this for years, that our enterprise and operational risk management programs are overly captivated on IT security. I am not saying that IT security is not a big risk. IT security is a huge risk. It's a significant risk in the organization, and we need to address it. But it's not the only risk. And I look at a lot of ERM and ORM programs, and they seem to be overly focused, like 90% of their risk exposure is IT security, and that is just not balanced. I wrote a blog just a few months ago, December 2019, and the blog article was, we have a tale of two futures, taking a little spin off Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. We have a tale of two futures. Is our future a Blade Runner future or a Star Trek future? The decisions we make on environmental and health and safety and things like that right now indicate our future. And in that context, health and safety issues like pandemics, as well as environmental issues and climate change, I called out in there, and that too many ERM programs, and when you look at Gartner and Forrester, and you look at their waves and magic quadrants, it seems like enterprise risk is all about IT security. And IT security is a significant risk and should be part of it, but these organizations are completely missing like environmental and health and safety and other risks. And all these are critically important to include in our enterprise risk management program. And I think a lot of organizations are starting to finally wake up to that. We're gonna have a more balanced view of what enterprise risk is to the organization. So in that context, I think we're going to see a greater focus on operational resiliency, which is this integrated approach to bringing business continuity and operational risk together. And now the FCA and PRA and Bank of England are leading the world in operational resiliency regulation. But coming out of this, I wouldn't be surprised to see operational resiliency type requirements go across industries and around the world as a result of this pandemic. But we need this integrated approach that sees the big picture of risk across risks, has strong scenario planning, and being able to monitor and manage and understand and go through tabletop exercises to be able to respond to global risks here. I've written that this current pandemic is not a black swan. And to me, those individuals that are calling it a black swan are in a CYA exercise, a cover your behind, type exercise. And because they look bad with their board of directors that they didn't have this risk on the radar. But we've been warned about this. We've had pandemics. I love history, and so I'm particularly medieval history. You can talk about all the plagues in the Middle Ages, but we had the Spanish flu from 100 years ago. We had a virus pandemic just 10 years ago, and I remember being in San Francisco and going through tabletop exercises and scenarios across many different organizations working collaboratively. How would we respond to a pandemic? Should it rise again of even a greater scale? We've had Bill Gates and even George W. Bush tell us about that we need pandemic preparedness. It's been on the World Economic Forum, top risks for years on their chart, along with environmental risks and climate change and other things. It's been discussed at Davos. and other things. This is not a risk that it was not foreseen that is a black swan. This was foreseen. The fact is people were unprepared for it. It wasn't on their radar. But it was fully known that this was going to happen at some point. But we were unprepared. Now, organizations need a more balanced view to enterprise risk, and as a result, we're going to see a greater focus on operational resiliency, bringing business continuity and operational risk together and being able to integrate that into the strategies of the organization. At the end of the day, I'd like to, and we're in the GRC Supper Club here. I'd like to go to the official definition of GRC that's found in the OSEG GRC capability model. This is the only definition of GRC that is in a publicly vetted standard out there. And so GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives. That's the governance piece, whether they're entity level objectives, division, department, process, project, or asset level objectives. What are the objectives? While addressing uncertainty, that's risk management. The definition of risk in ISO 31000 is risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So there's a relationship there. And act with integrity, that's the compliance. So once again, GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity. To me, this whole focus on operational resiliency is at that core there. That how do we maintain resilient operations so that we can reliably achieve our objectives? And in the case of a pandemic, those objectives are changing while addressing the uncertainty and risk and act with the integrity of the organization and be able to make sure those controls are in place. I often illustrate, these types of scenarios that we're talking about with the Titanic from going back to 1912. With the case of the Titanic, Captain E.J. Smith said, that he had never seen a wreck and never been in a wreck, and he could not conceive of any disaster happening to the vessel. You have overconfidence in the ship's design, from the CEO of the ship himself, the captain, but also in the public. The front page of the newspaper, the press said the Titanic was unsinkable. It sank on its maiden voyage. How often are our businesses overconfident? Risk, we're a good company. We got things under control here. We don't need to be worried about pandemics or IT security risks and things. How often is our senior leadership overconfident, like Captain E.J. Smith of the Titanic? There's a push to get across the Atlantic quickly to show its speed and power of the day. How often are we pushing the business too fast where we can't keep up and risk can catch us off guard? There's external risk elements that bear down on the Titanic called icebergs. It just so happens in 1912, the Northern Arctic ice shelf was already breaking up. There's already some form of climate change. And then not only that, the tidal moon poles of January, February, March 1912 were stronger in nature. They were bringing more of those icebergs further into the shipping lanes, creating more hazards than were normally there in April 1912 when the Titanic happened. Just like with our business and organizations, we live in an external risk environment that can be impacted by COVID-19 and other virus or wildfires in Australia or many other things. We have to be agile and be ready to adapt to a very risky world out there. There's health and safety risks with the Titanic. They didn't have the proper number of life preservers and lifeboats for the number of passengers on board. There's plenty of time to get off the boat. The ship sank very slowly, but they lacked the safety equipment, and many people drowned. They tell us that the size of the rudder and propeller were undersized for the massive size of the ship, and it was not as navigable in the waters to navigate around icebergs. Do we have the right capital reserves set aside to sustain a pandemic and other things? A lot of businesses are failing right now because they don't have the right capital reserves. Third-party risks. They tell us that the iron ore that was used in the rivets to hold the very seams of the ship together was of a brittle and inferior quality. There's quality issues in the supply chain, the iron ore and the rivets of the ship. We're seeing issues right now in third-party risk in the midst of this pandemic. People are sourcing personal protective equipment that haven't been approved by the FDA here in the United States. And there's quality issues in it, and the things can still get through the whatever masks people are making, and all those type of things. We've got lots and lots of supply chain issues and disruption and challenges and third-party risk with subcontractors and consultants and temporary workers and everybody else working from home with our data and systems. That's all challenging.
Hi, Michael. Sorry to interrupt you. Just conscious of the time, and also you've got so many questions coming in for you. And I'm hoping that people might be able to hold on for for a bit longer after 7 o'clock, so we can maybe progress the panel a little bit. I just wanted to say I thought the Titanic went down in 1990 with Kate Winslet, Leonardo DiCaprio, but that was a different thing. But there's a lot of questions here. I'm going to try, and hopefully you can all hang on a bit longer, because we've got James to come, and he's got some great points that he wants to make as well. But I know we've got at least 10 questions, which we're not going to get through now. But I know that I want to try and see if I can get somebody on camera to ask a question for you. And let's see if we can get Claire on now. Let's see.
And I'm on.
Let me turn your webcam request on, and fingers crossed we
Okay.
might work. Have you got a request?
Oh,
there you go.
I do. Am I on? Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Would you like to do a very quick intro and then just your question to Michael, please?
Michael, thank you. And actually, I have to say, Sandra, really, really interesting. So I work in risk and communications a lot, and we stand by you, all of you in the boardroom. The thing that's quite interesting to me, Michael, is something you said about the fact that these uncertainties and risks are not sitting, they sit with one organization or one person in a boardroom, but actually they sit in every single department.
Yes.
And one of the things I was so we are right now, every single day, working with companies since COVID struck, working on public affairs, communications, risk management, etc. And I'm really intrigued about what is your solution to stop risk sitting with an individual who probably, I don't mean to be rude to half the people in this call, but probably has some fantastic military history, probably worked in the government, probably worked in compliance, etc., and actually understand that the head of marketing, the head of communications, the head of supply, head of everything from how we're going to get our provenance of products right the way through to our regulatory controls, and more importantly, how we're going to meet every single standard around our needs to be able to be meeting our requirements from our banks and our suppliers. How do we get that to the boardroom that's not vested in one person in a RAG process where we're all doing red, amber, and green?
I mean, to me, it's what I call federated approach to risk management. That we have a risk officer, an enterprise risk management program, but there's a lot, as you bring up, there's lots of departments of risk. There's HR risk, there's supply chain risk, there's IT risk, there's quality risk, environmental risk, health and safety risks. You know, we have lots of departments of risk. And it's the role of that more central risk function to be more of a collaborator and communicator of risk across the business and get all these different subject matter experts and departments to work together cohesively on a risk strategy. And the chief risk officer isn't there to own risk. I mean, risk is owned by the business.
But do you not think there should be some sort of tool to help? I mean, he owns the risk in the business. But do you think that I mean, we're working right now trying to work out what is the tool to help all those departments come together and have that conversation? Because at the moment, the board isn't asking them to have that conversation, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, it involves strategy, process, and information architecture and technology to be able to manage all that. And strategy and process gets defined, and from there, the information technology architecture can support that with the right tool. You know, because there's good tools and there's bad tools out there, and there's, you know, tools that are good for the small to mid-size organization. But then those aren't necessarily the same tools that meet the large organization, because large organizations have a lot of risk normalization aggregation. One might be a high risk in one department, might be a low risk in another department. And I was talking to one large financial services firm that said their board of directors never wants to see a heat map from their, you know, their risk management platform again, because everything just sort of got thrown on there without any logic.
Oh my God, I love that. That is just, oh, music to my ears. Sorry, Lee. That's just.
No, thank you. No, I was just coming on.
And I have to say, Sandra, I actually love skill, will, and grit for your board meetings. I love the idea that you're creating skill, will, and grit for your board directors. Well done, you.
Thank you, Claire. I will probably try and get us on to James very quickly now, but another quick question that's come in from Andrew Boyarsky around, in conversations that he's had, some organizations are blaming risk managers for not planning for C19. Are you hearing this? Is it a fair analysis? And are you hearing about, you know, BCM managers being let go?
Yeah, definitely, because part of the problem is that a lot of BCM as well as enterprise and operational risk management have been overly focused on IT security. And again, I am not minimizing IT security. In the 1990s, I cut my teeth in risk management in IT security. You know, it is a risk, and it's a significant risk. But a lot of BCM programs, a lot of operations programs, and enterprise risk programs, you know, they're operating myopically, like with the blinders on, like the horse. That, you know, our most significant risks are IT security risks, and they're completely ignoring other risks like health and safety and environmental risks, and those are buried in other parts of the organization, not getting proper attention. And we need a more balanced view of risk. And so, yes, I think some people's feet are being held to the fire.
Brilliant. And I tell you what, there's one more, and then I will move on to James, and then hopefully we can keep as many of you for an extra 15 minutes just for the panel discussion. But because we were talking about heat maps, and I wrote some notes down, which don't want to go into too much detail around ERM. One of my experience of working with ERM at PwC and as a software guy, were high-level spreadsheet teams of 3. ORM was doing risk, risk PDFs and RAG reports. IT risk were doing control rate, RACI matrix, and the BCM team were doing the runbooks and the playbook. So that's my experience of it. And this question really is coming from Manoj, who's Manoj Kuwal. Do you believe organizations will change their approach to deal with low frequency times high severity risks? These risks don't get high enough on the risk heat maps and hence may get ignored. For such risks, does assessing likelihood or frequency even matter?
Yeah, I wrote a paper on that in my Forrester days back in 2006, and saying that our heat maps are sort of miscolored and misplotted. We're not having significant risks, that are high impact, high likelihood, that are often thrown up in the upper right. Organizations aren't having like, million, billion-dollar loss events every month. But those are where the red risks are. But the most significant risks, like a 9/11, like a COVID-19, I mean, those are those low frequency, high impact events that are often colored yellow or something like that. And those are the ones that significantly hurt the organizations. And we need to monitor that more appropriately. And I'd like to see the organization out there that has had something like a pandemic, and then has actually can show in their heat maps. And I'm not a huge fan of heat maps, but I would love to see the organization that leverages them and has shown it over the last 6 months how that risk has actually moved from a low likelihood, high impact event to a high impact, high likelihood event. That would be showing risk management done properly, to be able to show that progression in things as information and situations developed.
Great answer, thank you. And in terms of my experience of that as well, is it's usually done 6 months later of like a trend analysis that's done in the past, right? Looking rather than to the future in the present. So that's something we can discuss going forward. And that's one of my passions, having been, someone that audits processes and key controls, seeing all the duplication and lack of bringing this together. So we can pick that up in the panel or a later session. But thank you very much, Michael. That was fantastic.